industrial agriculture can damage our environment and also our health. And these are the hidden costs of this industrial agriculture. And that's why a lot of practitioners, scientists, and governments started to look for an alternative to produce food, which in a way that is more resource efficient. And cities where we are already occupying land for our social life sound like a good place to produce food, and that could solve our problem with land resources. And my research was focused on high-tech urban agriculture to see how agricultural technologies are being integrated in urban food production practices. And I did that, as I mentioned before, in Shanghai and Amsterdam. And today I'm not gonna go too much in details about the theoretical framework that was developed in this study and methodology, but I will more focus on the findings of this study. But to give you some information of how this study was done, I'll just go through the steps that we have taken during this study. This study was based on following actors, humans and non-humans, and we tried to see how these actors are connected to each other and how their interactions is influenced by the context and planning approaches in these two case studies. And then we compared the impact of planning organizations and planning approaches on technology-driven transition of food production practices in the two case studies. And this was the starting point of the study. The actor or acton, non-human actor, that we try to start from there and see how this connects others to each other. And this is a light and a light of hope somehow for emergence of this high-tech urban agriculture. Using this light gave the possibility to produce food inside build-ups and created new kind of relationship between food production and the cities. And this practice could be anywhere, in a military building in Ada, like this photo and what you saw, or this could be in any building in Amsterdam. But in our studies, to understand how these interactions are created and how this high-tech urban agriculture is emerging, we try to study the pressures on current food production systems, and then we try to see how different alternatives or niches are being developed and how they are diffused or they are not diffused. I will talk about this in the coming slides. Well, when we look at the case of Amsterdam, there were quite a lot of pressures actually on the current food system, even though Amsterdam has quite good reputation in producing food, and we have in Netherlands great agricultural system and food production system, but the market trends and technology readiness of those core technologies that should be used in high-tech urban agriculture and emerging food-related health issues in the Dutch context, and a lot of European and even international goals and laws like Sustainable Development Goal of United Nations and Amsterdam's urban food strategy put some sort of pressures on current system, and they made some sort of context for development of alternatives. And these alternatives in the Netherlands were, and in the case of Amsterdam, were created with what so-called the old Dutch golden triangle and diamond approach, where businesses, knowledge institutes, and governments work together to create new ways of producing food. And well, here, if we look at the actors, we will, I don't know if I name it here, but there are a lot of organizations then involved, including Amsterdam's Food Council, your own group maybe is one of those, ANFP is one of those actors that is part of this network that is promoting and helping creation of these alternative practices. And on the other hand, we have companies like Philips or GrowX and all other small startups that are trying to start new businesses around high-tech urban agriculture in Amsterdam, and then governmental organizations that are helping these niches to emerge, and they are supporting, especially their financial support is helping them to work and emerge in Amsterdam. But in Shanghai, things were quite different, and things were happening very much top down, and they were based on Chinese Communist Party's policies and state-owned companies to reach some sort of self-sufficiency in production of vegetables and being less dependent on food imports. And that was the main goal. And all organizations and actors that were involved in these niche developments were working on something very different than what was happening in Amsterdam. They had one goal, and that was producing food in large scale to reach some sort of self-sufficiency for the country. And these different approaches created also different kind of practices. In Amsterdam, we see that more household scale practices have emerged, and they were focused, a lot of companies were focused on development of core technologies that could be later on exported to China. And well, actually, if we look at the Chinese part, they are using those technologies in their practices. And there are a lot of multifunctional indoor farms and research facilities that helps somehow only small scale vertical farms rather than commercial large scale farms. But in Shanghai, well, because of the goals that these niche developments had, and that was self-sufficiency, things were happening in another scale. And even they are called differently. They call plant factories, huge vertical farms that are made to produce huge amount of food to feed more than 1 billion people. I mean, that's the goal. And they work a lot on development of products. So export of products, what is quite important for Chinese also economy, and community high-tech agriculture, which was quite an interesting phenomenon that I saw in Shanghai, things that are, again, more in line with Chinese Communist Party's policies, I guess. And also research facilities that, again, were in line with creation of these plant factories and large-scale high-tech farms. And the last stage that we compared was diffusion of these practices or inability to diffuse. And there were some institutional barriers. I'm now more talking about Amsterdam. And there were, in Amsterdam, we saw that regulations are quite of hassle for these startups to integrate their practices in especially urban development projects. And there was also a mismatch between imaginaries and reality. Imaginaries were those that were created by these very nice pictures and renders, visualizations of the projects that there will be soon a huge, well, self-sufficient eco-village in Amsterdam and Shanghai. Well, the visualization sounds really great, but they cause a lot of problems. There was a big mismatch. That was not something that the startups could deliver. And this was just a nice image. And this created some sort of lack of trust between those planners those policymakers and those that are offering this kind of technologies. And we saw this in both Amsterdam and Shanghai, and one of these eco villages in Amsterdam that is now for many years this image on their website, and they advertise it, and we cannot see much of that in Amsterdam yet. And this was supposed to be there in 2018, 19. Well, so this mismatch was quite a big problem. And then, but in Amsterdam, we have a very good business ecosystem and policies that support startups. All these subsidies and fundings that help a lot of startups to become what they are nowadays. And we have a lot of vertical farming companies and startups right now in Amsterdam and the whole Netherlands, thanks to these governmental supports, subsidies, or any kind of financial supports that they gave. And there is also a risk at least when I've done this study for diffusion of this high-tech urban agriculture around the city, in the city, and that was the dependency of this approach to transition on business models and market demands left quite limited space for long-term social and environmental goals. And that was something that very well considered in Shanghai and in Chinese policies. So that was actually the lesson that Amsterdam could learn from Shanghai, to look not only what we need today, but try also to solve the tomorrow's problems. And right now, I'm working on these research questions, but I thought it's nice to share with you. And maybe these are research questions that could be studied in Amsterdam. And this is: what kind of transformative capacities do we need to transform current food production system in Amsterdam? And how can we, as planners and planning organization, create these capacities for transition towards a more sustainable high-tech urban agriculture? And well, that was the end of my presentation. And if you have any question, I would be happy to answer.
Thank you, Mohsen. Very nice presentation. I think I will invite Art to talk about his work now. So then at the end, we have more time to discuss these questions as well. So if you have any question to Mohsen, like, hold on a bit, and then we will continue. So Art, do you know how to share screen, or I have a file I can also share Okay, you already do it. Great.
You can see my screen now? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm Art van der Kreken, CEO of GrowX, slowly growing to Growy. So the company name is still GrowX, but we think we are, as we call ourselves, next level farmers. So we also stepped up one letter in the alphabet. So we come from GrowX to Growy. So the new company name is now Growy. And we are a vertical farming company based in Amsterdam. The company is started 3 years ago in a small scale in Amsterdam to produce for retail, or mainly to produce for high-end customers in the restaurant business. I took over the company 2 years ago, and we developed a new technology, which we now have up and running in Amsterdam. So we have, well, let's say the first fully autonomous vertical farm. So with automatic seeding, automatic growing, and automatic harvesting lines, where we can have a full autonomous farm. We are more in the large scale vertical farming, so definitely not in the small scale solutions, but yeah, as most used to call it in Asia, they call it a plant factory. It's really large scale. So we're looking at 5,000 to 10,000 square meters of growing surface. Yeah, we try to optimize our vertical farm, and we really see ourselves also as farmers. We are not a technology company. We are not selling technology. We are not a social solution. We are really producing food for the future. So we are really a food producer. What is important for us is we have a couple of basic things. The first of all is we think it's very important to keep the product tasty. It is delicious and we need to get people to eat more vegetables. First and most important thing is it's tasty. People really would like to eat it and would like to have it. Of course, we make it healthy, we make it very sustainable, but it has to be tasty. That's for us a very basic part of our principles. Next thing is very important to make it healthy. What we have seen and studied last year with Wageningen is that vertical farming salad are very rich in vitamins, mineral, and antioxidants. And we also see salad as a vegetable. Most of the people look at a salad factory. Hey, you produce salad. That doesn't add anything to our food system. We think vertical farm can definitely add something to the global food system. And that is with a good taste, but also with a very high health content. So we can really get more vitamins, more mineral, and more antioxidants into the people's diets. And of course, it's clean, no pesticides, no fertilizer, and no land use. And we even come to a complete circular farm where the water and the energy is coming from organic food waste. So we don't need any energy, we don't need any water to grow our plants. What also is very important is to make it affordable. What we have seen in vertical farming around the world, and what I think today we still see is there's an enormous amount of there's an enormous amount of vertical farming starting up, but everything is very expensive. The cost price of an average vertical farming in the US today is still around $30 per kilo of salads, which in the US is probably feasible, but it's no way possible to do that in Holland. So we started building a vertical farm to make it with a very low cost price to make it very efficient. Of course, there also the autonomous part is very handsome. If you don't need any people, it's also costing, the labor costs are of course very low, but also the yields are very high because it's all automated and we can manage the yields very well. And the investment cost is very low. We are around €1,000 per square meter for a large scale vertical farm. And the cost price of the salad is below €10 per kilo. That means that today we can deliver to the Lidl or the Albert Heijn in Holland. And of course, in other countries in America, it's enormous attractive and very cheap. But we also looking at Africa. I mean, we are working on a farm in Ghana, in Accra, and even there we can do it now. We are of course also working in Scandinavia, where prices are very high. This morning we signed a deal in Trondheim in the north of Norway, where we're going to build a farm, and also in Oslo we're going to build farms. But of course that's a high-end market, but our focus is to make it affordable and available for everyone. That's where we can really make an impact on the food system in cities, but also in cities where they don't have the money like we have here in Amsterdam or in New York or Dubai or Bahrain. As I said, we try to make it circular. One of the big things, of course, of creating a vertical farm is it has to be affordable and cheap, but also it has to be circular. I believe that food system, we need to change something on the food system, and just vertical farming with using no land, no pesticide and making it cheap is not it. We try to make it circular, and I think we achieved that by using the organic waste. It looks like a bit complicated picture. But if you start from the left, there is the supermarket, which is our end client, where we can serve our clients. From the supermarket, a lot of out-of-date products go to the dump, to the landfill these days. And that's not only the salad out-of-date product, but the complete organic waste product. From an average supermarket, that's really quite a big amount. Although it's only 1 to 2%, it still is a big amount on large scale. If we use that food waste, we can transform it via a digester into clean water, into energy, into CO2, and into heat and nutrition. And with those elements that we pick from that organic waste stream, we can fully run our vertical farm. So if we place a vertical farm on a distribution center of Albert Heijn, for example, in Holland, or somewhere near the edge of Amsterdam, based on the organic waste that we can collect from households in the city, from restaurants in the city, or from supermarket, we can produce 100% of the salads based on that stream. And the elements that we need to run a vertical farm are only water, nutrients, and energy, and CO2. By taking that from organic waste, we are also CO2 positive. So we don't produce climate neutral salad, we produce climate positive salad. And in Holland, to give you an idea, there's today already 200,000 ton of out-of-date product from supermarkets going to landfill. If I use that 200,000 ton to produce energy, I can produce double the amount of salads that today is used in Holland. So there's more than enough organic waste only from supermarket to produce all the salad. And we didn't even discuss the organic waste from households or restaurants. So that's the thing we have worked on the last year to develop it. So what makes our farm next level? Mainly to close the loop and to lower the cost. Close the loop is what I just explained. We collect the food waste, we run it to a digester, and we are off-grid. So we are fully off-grid and fully climate neutral. And we do it very less expensive than all the other ones because of the automation rate. It's 100% autonomous. So everything is data-driven and fully autonomic. The robots do all the work. The robots and artificial intelligence and software is making the plant profiles. And of course, we are AI, data-driven software, having picture of every leaf every day in the cloud, and having AI specialists from Wageningen that are our growers based on the software. We have two concepts that we developed. We call it our tools to grow. One is the Growy Farm on the right. The Growy Farm is a big plant factory. We produce on the distribution center, so with 0 food mileage, close to the supermarket distribution center. That's where we produce the food. So we deliver there the seeds. We put the seeds on one end, and on the other end of the farm, the packaged salads or herbs or microgreens come out and go directly to the supermarket. But what we have seen is that, of course, what we miss in this type of thing is the connection with the consumer. We need to inform the people how food can be produced and will be produced in the future. So we also developed our Growy House, and our house is a kind of vertical farming system that we put in cities. This building is a complete wooden building, a circular building. We have a greenhouse on top. And in this building downstairs, we have a restaurant and a shop where people can buy the salads, taste the salad, but they can also walk through the vertical farms. On the middle level, we have 5 vertical farm cells, so 1,000 square meters of vertical farm production, where people can see how things are grown. Downstairs, people can deliver their organic household waste, and upstairs, they can see what we do with it and what we grow with it. And on top, we have a layer where we can do all kinds of information sessions, meeting rooms, and other things. And we have a greenhouse on top. And in the greenhouse, we can show people how we do, for example, the tomatoes and all the other plants and eatable flowers. So this is a small-scale production system, which we built in a city. The main economic driver of this building is the delivery of microgreens to restaurants in the city. So it's economically viable because we have high-end customers for the microgreens that we produce in the city, and we can deliver directly to the consumer and the restaurants in the city. But it's also to tell the story and to get people connected to food again. And outside of the city, in the edges of the city, we build the big plant farms to produce the food. The food we should not produce in the city, because if we produce food in the city, we first have to ship it out of the city to a distribution center to get it to the consumer. So producing food in a city is not a good idea because it takes extra food miles to get it to the consumer. What we grow, of course, a lot of discussion is always, is vertical farming an added value to the food system? Is it what we need? We can produce salad mixes, microgreens and herbs, and of course with high nutritional value. We cannot produce protein in a vertical farm, but we don't need to, because protein in 10 years, in my opinion, will all come from fermentation. So proteins, there is a better solution than a vertical farm to grow proteins. And I think for the carbohydrates, I mean, they are there around the world. The rice, the grain, the potatoes are there in the world. But what we need is vitamins and fresh taste. And that's what a vertical farming can add to the food system. Yeah, here's a picture from how the vertical farm looks inside. Of course, no one needs to go in there. It's all robots, and it's very much based on AI and plant profiles. Together with Wageningen, we have a huge research team that is on a daily basis working on plant profiles and optimizing the growth, mainly focusing on nutritional values. How can we get a better plant, and how can we produce more vitamin and nutrients in a plant? Yeah, I said we work with Wageningen a lot, but also with Haas, with AMS in Amsterdam very much. And we have a couple of private partners for seeds, for sensors, for lighting, and for, of course, the software. That, I think, is what we do. So see if I can stop sharing. Yeah. So that's our input in the food system.
Thank you, Art. That's really an eye-opener of how technology already grows. Seems like we're actually like ahead of time. So I will kindly ask Andrea to give us some feedback, and then we could get into the discussion section. That's, I think, the most exciting part of our meeting.
Great, thanks. And thanks, Mohsen and Art, for those presentations. I thought it was just super great information of how we started from these two cities, from opposite side of the world in two different contexts. And then we zoomed into what a high-tech urban farm actually looks like, and all the benefits and even some of the challenges of such an enterprise. So I guess what I picked up a bit from the presentations is that, well, and also a bit of a perspective, is that I think globally there is the understanding of the potential contributions from high-tech urban farming to the global food system is still a very gray research area. And it seems like there are still a few questions to answer and to be able to further define the role of high-tech urban farming. So some questions I guess I picked up were high-tech urban farming for whom? So it seems like in its current state, there's a risk that it remains a channel for a few. And right now we're in the middle of a pandemic, so we've realized the importance of relocalizing where our food comes from, of building resilience, and how valuable it can be to grow food nearby. So it was really great to hear art examples of how they're expanding to places like sub-Saharan Africa, where you wouldn't think high-tech urban farming belongs there, but clearly there is the potential of adaptability. And more importantly as well, that it's accessible and tasty, because that was my other question. Do we like this? We saw the renders of the eco-village, we saw how the food is grown, and I guess it breaks a bit with that perception we have, well, a romantic perception of farming and how our food is produced. But I guess at the end of the day, it sounds like food is for the people, and as long as it's tasty, and I really liked how Art really highlighted this part, everyone is on board. And then the other question is, what is the opportunity? And then I'm thinking we're also in the middle of a climate crisis, in the middle of a biodiversity crisis. So it's not only about being able to produce food differently, but also smarter and making the best out of resources and in a circular way. And the other challenge is that we're in the middle of a nutrition transition around the world, for which, and I also really like how I put it, we need more vitamins. We need to address the challenges of poor diets and diversify those diets. And if the food can come from nearby, so we cut down that farm to fork journey, even better. So clearly the technology and the drive is there. We saw two very different examples in Amsterdam and Shanghai, how sometimes it can come from the top down, whereas, for example, in Amsterdam, the example was more from the bottom up, but then what are the barriers? And I think at the end of the day, it comes down always to what Mohsen touched on, which is those institutional barriers. I think we're still a long way in terms of putting in the work so that this type of food production can be better integrated into the urban system. So I'm not even talking food system, I'm talking urban system, the city. And on that note, I guess I did prepare like 3 lessons learned because I really like this topic. It's very, very fascinating. And I do agree with that we are kind of making our food system a little bit more technologically forward if we are to to achieve sustainable development. So a few things to consider, I guess. Number one is that urban versus rural stigma. And for that, I would like you to think about the city, because our world is increasingly more urban. I mean, big cities like Amsterdam, you know, this huge metropolises, very diverse. People from all over the world move there. Shanghai is even more built. And at the end of the day, urban farming will always expect resistance in these contexts. And I guess from a local government perspective, which is something actually we work with a lot at EAT, and the challenge is that the mandate of cities and local governments is first and foremost to provide quality housing or shelter to its citizens, as well as services. Therefore, urban farming will always be competing for space. And even though us who are quite aware of its potential, we could say it's even part of those essential services those cities should be providing, well, it's still not a mandate. So there is the technology, the knowledge, all the lessons learned, but if we don't start putting it into policy and regulation, yeah, I think we're a long ways away. So that leads me to a second point of, yeah, how do we embed it in local policies and the urban system? This is one type of urban farming. So in order to be able to provide it with the space and the resources and the public acceptance it needs to thrive, yeah, I think spatial planners are perhaps like the most strategic group to be able to make this happen, because we are the practitioners with, and sorry if not everybody's a spatial planner in the group, but we are the practitioners that actually have this very holistic perspective of how the urban system functions. So in that sense, I feel like there is an opportunity there that we're not aware of. And then one thing is, yeah, the third is that high-tech urban farming. I think it's one of the most strategic opportunities around the world to relocalize the food system. So clearly, and you might see it in the news or whatever your preferred food news media is, that currently there's a lot of talk about this, climate change and everything, and there's a big UN Food System Summit going on, and it takes place next week. And you know, in these big forums right now, they're debating what are the solutions and what are those transition pathways we need to put forth, and perhaps this is one of them. It's part of the innovation movement, and really accelerating that effort to relocalize the food system. So it opens opportunities to shorten the farm to fork journey, to make smart use of resources, increase access to safe and nutritious food. I think this is super important. And I think the other one is to revamp the labor force in cities. Like, we're so disconnected by living in cities. High-tech urban farming and other types of urban agriculture can reconnect us with food. It'll be close by, and we could even work with it. How cool would it be to say I live in a city, but I work in a farm? I think not a lot of people can say that. So all in all, I think it's, just to wrap up, it is possible for high-tech urban farming to coexist in a world, as long as, yeah, we acknowledge its potential, we support it through policy and regulation, and we are able to complement it with other types of farming, such as peri-urban farms. I really like the example of proteins. Not everything can be grown in a high-tech urban farm, so we also should be a little bit more aware of actually how we complement it, that we need to provide it the infrastructure, the clean energy it needs, and of how do we engage citizens in farming through it? How do we tap into that opportunity? And I think especially for young people, for young professionals, some of us in this group, so that the next generation can actually be a little bit more involved in farming. Yeah, so those are a few things I picked up. Looking forward to the debate.
Thank you. Thank you. I think Andrea touched upon many important points and connected dots to lines in line with our upcoming discussion or debate. Of course, we have these technologies, but how can we really embed it in our urban settings or in our everyday life? And how could we, as Art already said, they're working very hard to make it accessible. Also, like, just be aware that in Africa or Latin America, there are a lot of problems about getting fresh vegetables, because often when the infrastructure is not facilitate, it's not possible to grow vegetables in a rural area and like send to the city. So that brings to our debate. So I will say, like, maybe we spend we have 2 to 3 themes. So maybe we spend each themes around like 10 minutes and then we go to next round. So the first one is more, let's say, technical and more reflexive on the presentation. You can just read the questions, and then you're welcome to raise your hand, ask any questions. Yeah, who would like to start? Anyone would like to start? No? Yes? Janus.
Thanks, Ingsu, and thanks for the presentations. I don't necessarily have an answer, but I'm curious to hear Art and Mosen to reflect upon this question, because when I was listening to Mosen's presentation, I think one of the barriers that he identified was the difficulty of diffuse the vertical high-tech farming, and that there are no business models. But when I was listening to Art's story, it seemed actually quite promising with different types of model products, like the growy farm, the growy house, for example. So this seems much more positive. So how do the both of you well see those business models? How future-proof are they?
Austin, you go first.
Answer to your question is that this study was done in 2015, and the growix that I studied was very different than what we saw today. I mean, I've been often in growix, and I talked with previous ex-managers of growix, and that was nothing similar to what you heard today, and that was nothing that you could, I mean, actually, what I wrote here was based on that. I mean, the management and everything that I saw at growix and some other companies. But I'm talking about the growix that I saw a few years ago, not the growix that are just managing. That's something that is a very different story. And yeah, with time passing and new technologies emerging, things are changing a lot. And nowadays, vertical farming is becoming something promising. Business models that are developing are promising, but yeah, but this was not the case a few years ago. That's my answer to your question.
Yeah, well, we definitely have a business model today, as I said, and I think I demonstrated. So I definitely see a prospect for vertical farming. I think vertical farming, high-tech farming is The question is, how do you call it? The high-tech farming is, I think you can do that for anyone. That can be for normal agriculture or a greenhouse or a vertical farm. So high-tech farming is, I think all the farming slowly moves into high-tech farming, and vertical farming is a type, the way we farm in different layers in high sessions with a no land use. But there are definitely a lot of options as well, and even in Amsterdam, I would say, because I was talking today to this morning to people in Norway, a retailer in Oslo, and people in Trondheim. If you look at prices there, then feasibility is no issue at all. But even in Holland, we can do it. And talking to Albert Heijn this afternoon, I mean, then you really talk about the lowest price for salads around the world. I mean, not even only in Europe, but around the world, the lowest price for fresh vegetables in general are in Holland. I mean, we have our called, you're probably all familiar with the Big Mac index. We have our own rucola index, where we look at what's 100 grams of rucola costing around the world. And Holland is really the cheapest place to buy 100 grams of rucola in a retailer. It's amazing. In the US, you pay $4 minimum. So is there a prospect for vertical farming? Yes, even in Amsterdam, it's possible. We can now produce for the local retailers here in Holland. So that's a big step. Major obstacles are, there's only one obstacle, and that's the government permitting. Where can we do it? That's the only obstacle we have. Financing these days is not an issue anymore. The only issue is how you get a permit to build a farm, to build a house. That's the only issue we have as a company. We have, by the way, Moosen, we had zero subsidy from the government, at least since I stepped in GrowX. So although we are a startup scale-up, we have zero subsidy. So it's all done by equity via investors. One of the investors is one of the funds of the city, Amsterdam, but it still is a private investment fund. Yeah, and the other question is, of course, is high-tech or is urban farming embedded in a city? I think I said it already during my presentations. I don't believe in producing food in cities. I don't see the added value of it. It doesn't make sense to produce food in the center of a city, because you need the food on the distribution centers of the food. People buy online from big distribution centers. I mean, people buy in supermarkets, but people don't go to a salad shop to buy salad. I mean, people buy their food. It's a convenience world we live in. People buy at Gorilla and they want the things within 10 minutes on the front door. So people don't go to the local vertical farm to buy their salad. So if you produce salads, you have to do it with the lowest footprint, and you have to do it with the lowest, the shortest chain. The shortest chain is around cities. And in that fact, Holland is more or less one big city, but you have to build local farms with very short distribution chains, but that should not be in the city, because in the city, it's a shame of using space in a city, and the space in a city should be used to build trees and parks and make it greener and make it livable, but you don't build a vertical farm in a city. I don't see the use and no sense of that. So in that sense, vertical farming is connected to a city. Yes, of course. I mean, why are we in Amsterdam? Because most of the people in Holland live in Amsterdam, and the people are our end consumers, and that's what we need. But to build a farm, we're going to do that just on the outskirts of a city, preferably as close to many distribution centers for retailers as possible. What we do see, and that's what I said with our growing house, we need consumers to be informed. So that's why we would like to have this growing house as a kind of branding concept, but also to inform people and to let people feel what it is. I mean, the whole idea behind the growing house is, of course, to have students coming in, but also to have school class coming in, to inform people what is vertical farming, how is the food for the future being produced. So that information is a big part of our growing house concept, but it's not the food production in mass production. And the comparison between China and Asia and in general in the Netherlands is what you see in China is that they are very much focused on bulk production and really bring massive production. And in Holland, we try to think small scale around the city. And I think that you should, these ideas you should combine. In Holland, I think we are very smart, especially with Wageningen University, very smart in developing these things and making these technology. But the use, of course, should be in countries like Ghana or Kenya, where we should produce food, and not here in Europe.
So thank you both. I'm using the I'm taking the benefit from moderator. I hear some things, so I think I would like to speak out and then also have some question to you as well. So I hear from both Art and from Mosen reflecting to spatial planning issues. So scale and zoning are two big problems. So what kind of urban farming are we talking about? Are we talking about city center? Are we talking about like peri-urban area? So from what I've heard, Art thinks that there's no point to produce in the city center. It's also about planning, but if we want to combine things together, we better combine local, like these high-tech farming production with like urban food logistics. So like, for example, I'm just thinking out loud, to have a factory, to have an urban farming close to the food center in Amsterdam or within the food center might make sense, or within or close to where the logistic park in Alberheim. So it's probably not in the city center of Amsterdam, but it's probably in Zandam. And that comes to another question, like we're talking about the Dutch size, so it's like still really small. My previous company where I work, they also work for the plant factory, that's what we call in Asia. And I recognize the problems, like the vegetables grow in the vertical farming. They like the water doesn't stay very long in the plant, so it creates certain limitation of like how far it could be transported if it's too long, and then like they go pretty soft. So I'm also curious, like, is this progress in this kind of technology? And third, my reflection sounds like if we talk about the basic different standing point in China, rest of the world, in the Netherlands, like the business model of the Netherlands is not only about farming itself, but it's also like it's a whole, that's an ecosystem of this knowledge economy, because every steps how you turn waste into water, how you turn waste into power, and how you build the whole system like integratively into this model. It all takes a lot of knowledge compound innovation. So is this like where we're standing, that we invest a lot, but that also might bring a lot of revenue at the, like, if we envision the future? Yes. Anyone want to say something?
Well, can I add something? Well, about where you think urban vertical farming might be and so on. I mean, even in my research, I call it high-tech urban agriculture and not really vertical farming, because GrowX is an example of a vertical farm that is now, I mean, the new, especially GrowX, that I'm now getting familiar with that idea. Is one business model, one that, as also Art mentioned, makes sense to have such a thing maybe in pre-urban areas and by city. But high-tech urban agriculture is not only vertical farming. I mean, vertical farming, they call themselves also vertical farm. There are a lot of companies like Inform, one of the biggest companies now doing, but what they do, they produce food right inside the supermarket in city centers, and that creates some sort of relationship between consumers. I mean, consumers is where food is growing, and in Sweden have a lot of examples of these companies producing in food in the supermarkets right inside the cities, in city center. maybe the scale is different, but that has an added value. And this is not only then about producing food, but also to see, I see a lot of kids nowadays in Sweden in the supermarket where we have these vertical farms passing by and look at these vertical farms and say, oh, that I missed. I mean, I maybe didn't know how food grows, but these kids have the opportunity there to see how this is happening. And this is also an example. You see a lot of vertical farms in nursing homes, hospitals, hotels, restaurants, supermarkets, which are located inside cities. So they are becoming part of our, well, you have city center, they're emerging all around cities. And yeah, that I see something positive to see this vertical high-tech urban agriculture practices inside the city and even city center. And another thing is that I don't think that this high-tech urban agriculture is something to produce food and that is enough. No, that should be part of our food system. So maybe you need, this is an alternative food production, but to take advantages of this alternative, you should also have alternative distribution, alternative way of waste management, alternative way of everything should maybe happen differently to, yeah, to change the whole food system and not only the focus on the production part of it. But Art mentioned it was really interesting that they also work not only on production of food, but also they work with waste. And that is something that should be in this kind of practices. So it's not only here about food production, but also waste management that I found very, very interesting.
Frank, you want to say something? Yes.
Yes, thank you. My name is Frank Bakker, and I'm an urban planner at the City of Amsterdam. And I was trying to connect two of the remarks that were made before, because Art said the only problem is a permit. So, well, that's one of my things to, well, while I'm looking at vertical farming, the permits. But Mohsen also said it's all about scale. So I'm wondering what kind of problems are there when it's about scale? Because looking at the concepts of Art, the farm and the house, I suppose that introducing the farm into a distribution center of Albert Heijn or whichever supermarket, I don't think there's something extra as a permit apart from the distribution center itself. Or looking at a supermarket in the center of a city, a supermarket with just a small scale, or well, maybe some scale, but a small scale vertical farming into the supermarket, is there a permit problem? So I'm wondering, how can we well, address this problem if it's all about permits, and how to describe what kind of vertical farms we are talking about. Is there a solution, or is it all about how to, well, give a good definition of what is a supermarket, and is a supermarket with a vertical farming inside still a supermarket, or is there another permit needed? So I'm just trying to look at solutions here, and trying to find the discussion here.
Thank you. That's really spot to the point.
Yeah, I can react on that, of course. Now, Mohsen, I know very well what's happening in Scandinavia with this local. We have a lot of contact with a couple of retailers in Sweden at the moment, and they see the small initiatives. The problem there is that the food cost is huge. All these local small-scale supermarket, they have a value. Definitely, I don't want to discuss that. They have an added value to inform the people, but they can only produce a small amount of what is needed in the supermarket, and they cannot do that at every supermarket. And the price that they have to ask for a salad that comes out of that small scale things are very, very high. I mean, you really talk about organic times plus 50% in Sweden, where organic is already a lot more expensive here in Sweden than here in Holland. So these supermarket chains are calling us to say, hey, can you produce it with the same quality of vertical farm produced salads, but for a price which is acceptable in compared to organic even in Sweden. So it's the same with our growing house. With our growing house, we cannot produce salad for a retailer. The cost price is just too high, but it has another function. The function is informing the people. And I think both of these are important, and you cannot combine them. You cannot say, I make a food production where I also inform people and let's show people, because the difference in price is just too high. So you have to separate it, those two concepts, definitely. I don't think they can be mixed. You mentioned InFarm, by the way. InFarm does not produce in a supermarket. Infro has the highest footprint per gram of herbs that they produce, because they produce it all in central warehouses. They transport it with small vans into the supermarket to leave it there for a couple of days. So this is definitely not a sustainable way to go forward, although they have raised 800 million euro. So there should be something in the concept. But it's if you look at the economics, but definitely if you look at the sustainability of food production, that's not the way we should move forward. It should be more sustainable and should be more climate neutral. Otherwise, there's no. It's not a solution that sustains. And going back to Frank for the permitting, you're really correct. I mean, if I want to build a large-scale farm outside an industrial hall on a distribution center, then permitting is not really an issue, or at least it's a lot easier, making it very small scale in a supermarket. But it's the middle part, like our growing house, or like baking a small-scale vertical farm to inform the consumer. That's where you have an issue with planning. How do you integrate that?
Thank you, Art. So I think this part we're doing the last round, then we'll go into the next part. So Joey, if you want to ask, you want to say something, and then Arnold has a question. Arnold and Siska has a question. I'll read it later, but you can start first.
Okay, hi. So this is Joy. I am actually a plant scientist in California, US. So happy to join this meeting. It's very interesting. So after talking all this talk, and it's kind of inspiring, and I did have some question, because I'm not really quite sure about the system in Holland. So a lot of people are talking about doing a small scale vertical farm kind of things. But for me, because here in the US, everything is quite big scale. I really don't see how you guys gonna deal with that, especially like one of the key points for vertical farm is we are trying to controlling the environment to optimize the plant growth. But like if we're doing in a small scale, how do you deal with like the environmental pieces? Like how do you control the temperature, the lighting in a relatively small scale if you don't have a really good isolated like greenhouses, and then using a lot of LED in the winter time? How do you maximize the growth during the winter time? And then like also like Inzi was mentioning, she's saying some plant factory, they have these plant kind of look like kind of sad and wilting when they're doing the transportation. I think that part of the reason is the post-harvest piece is not there. So if the plant are not handled well enough, they're gonna lose water right away. So in a small scale, I really don't know how you guys gonna deal with the like post-harvest issue, and as well as like soil, not soil-borne, like a food safety issue, like Salmonella, E. coli, and all that, because I think that's a very important part of the things. I'm not saying like small scale is not gonna work, but I'm just very curious, because here we all do large scale. So I'm really interested in learning. How do you guys deal with that?
Great. There are some spices, and just adding to that, like Arnold and Siska asked about how does this practice can connect the trust of the food system, and then has this high tech farming already escaped from the niche opposition? Can they survive now in the current market force? I think all these questions goes to Art. So.
Yeah, I can answer to Joy. I mean, of course, I mean, we are building the first 2 farms in the US, so we definitely go for the large scale. I do agree that small scale farming, the question is what is scale? What is large scale and what is small scale? How do you define it? But we have cells, and the cells is about 150 square meter of growing area. So one cell is 4 by 15 by 3 meters high. And that's what we think is the maximum size also for a farm. I mean, you definitely know the Arrow farms and the Plenty and the Caleras and the Baueras. These are our competitors and of course our colleagues in the vertical farming company. And we can manage climate, temperature, etc. Of course, very, very well, much better than the big, large-scale farms even. So I do think that climate is not only a problem in a small scale. I think climate is even a bigger problem in the large scale. I mean, the issue of Arrow Farm and Bowery at the moment are their climate system. How can they manage climate in a large-scale farm? That's a big, big issue. So in a small scale, it's much easier to manage your climate and your system around it, but small scale in the sense of a couple of 100 square meter growing area. If you go to really small scale to 1 or 5 or 10 square meter, then I don't think it's economically not feasible. Of course, it's manageable, but it's not economically feasible to produce anything on that small scale. So I don't know if that answers your question, Joy.
Yeah, that answered my question, because I thought the small scale is like really, really small, like farmers market type of small scale. Yeah.
Now we really go for the 5, 10,000 to 15,000 square meter farms, so the large scale. And a question from Arnold, did we escape the niche? Today, yes. I mean, we are economically viable as a company today because of what we deliver to the high-end market. So there we make money and we can have our living, so to say. And in the large-scale farm, we can easily manage to compete with the Arrow farms and the Boweries and the Privas in this world, because the cost price is a lot lower. And it's all automated, so it's we can survive definitely the market forces even in Holland with the low prices.
Thank you, Art. And so now we are moving, like the last part, we're moving to the second part. It's like more spatial planning oriented debate. So we would like to address on a few things, like what issues may be resolved from high-tech farm, or vice versa, what kind of problem it may create. And talking about, like as Andrea said, like spatial planning is really stand at a strategic point, because like this profession, we are basically like distribute resource. So we have to envision what kind of resource we should allocate to different functions, and what is our aim to a better environment. So in terms of social sustainability, natural sustainability, in the whole circular economy, how can we understand urban farming in the context of all these like social environmental issues, and where does it stand, and how can spatial planning approach, facilitate, and go together with these types of farming in the future for our urban food system. And I just want to go back to what the conversation between Frank and Art. So apparently the middle scale, which, like, for example, you build a showcase, or like you embedded sort of the planned vertical farm space within the newly development area. Do you mean that this kind of scale is a problem, and like why is that for you?
Yeah, probably I can add. It's also the question that Siska is asking in the chat is very interesting in this book. And the major question is high-tech farming problems, city, how can we feed the city? Mm-hmm. My believing is that the food production will be disconnected from land use. So land use and food production will not be connected as it used to be. And that will be the coming 5 to 10 years, the biggest change in the world. Not only for Europe, but definitely for other parts in the world, that we're going to disconnect land use and food production. Food production could be protein fermentation, vertical farming, and meat, how do you call it, the clean meat production. These things will have such a major impact on our food system that for a city like Amsterdam, I think 50–60% of the food will be produced locally in factories in 10 years' time. So the whole discussion about people connecting to food system is very important. But it's very strange that I try to convince my kids that milk is coming from a cow. You try to raise them going to farmers, and by the end, by the time they are 20, they go to the Albert Heijn and they buy milk that's made out of fermentation of protein in a factory. So they say, hey, Dad, you try to learn me that milk is coming from a cow, but completely not true. Milk is not coming from a cow. So I think these are the things that are really changing the social aspects the coming 5 to 10 years of the food system. And I think that is one of the biggest issue of connecting people to the food system. And will also be a big issue. I mean, we got so many questions of people saying, but how can you produce healthy and sustainable food if you don't use soil? How is that possible? I mean, even Triodos Bank, which is one of the biggest banks, say, well, vertical farming, you know, for us, now we don't believe in vertical farming because it's not grown in soil, it cannot produce healthy food. Now we say, okay, but that's the thing we should discuss. So I think there's a big discussion around connecting people to food and to food system, but also what is that food system in the future?
I think this is a big statement to talk, like also just not forget about, like in the Netherlands, we have like huge infrastructures, water, soil, energy, like is contribute to existing farming system. So how is this new types of food production can contest with these like existing systems? And yeah, as at the end of the day, we planners, how should we approach this problem? Anyone? Any thoughts? Maybe Andrea, Arnold, Frank.
Yeah, maybe. I think there's two ways of looking at it when Art says we'll be disconnecting our food system from the soil, because one of the main things we're trying to from the food strategy of Amsterdam is trying to connect people to their food and to the soil, and trying to explain where the food comes from and why it's so important to have a healthy soil, and so there's something that's quite interesting to at that approach. On the other hand, it might give some because one of the main problems of agriculture in the Netherlands, of course, is there is too dense agriculture in such a small country. So if you maybe it is a way of relaxation of the agricultural sector in all of the Netherlands, and if the need of production is less high in the Netherlands, we might get a more healthy agriculture sector than we have nowadays. So maybe because I don't think high-tech farming will be the solution of our food system. It will just contribute to a food system which is more diverse, also in normal agricultural sector, like which is soil-based, but maybe less productive as it is nowadays.
Siska.
Yes, hello, thank you for the nice presentations. I guess going back a little bit, I guess it's also about, if like Art said that high-tech urban farming will be 50 to 60% of where we get our food from in 10 years, then I think you also have to think of farming and agriculture more than just feeding people, which I think has been like the Dutch approach for very long. But farming is also related to biodiversity and to ecosystems and land use. So like what will replace the agricultural land if we just have a bunch of food factories? And so I guess that was also related to this also connection to consumers and producers in the food system of how does vertical farming then fit into a bigger food system that has all these multi-dimensional uses instead of just one of feeding people. I guess that was my thought.
Andrea?
Yeah, I guess just along the same lines as Siska, that there's this whole like technological movement, but there's the counterpart as well, and there's agroecology, right? And just by definition, like the fact that some types of high-tech urban farming, for example, do not grow on soil and these things, it goes really like against the whole agroecology movement, because as Siska was saying, that's more about biodiversity and soil health and carbon capture and those things, but also about equity. And I think that people factor is super important, because yeah, I mean, farmers around the world, I think, are the ones most affected by the food system at the end of the day. So what's the balance then between high-tech farming and more not conventional, but perhaps more traditional nature-forward solutions? But that's just like a food for thought. I don't expect anyone to react. And I guess to the spatial planning question, I did have a comment that perhaps there could be a way that we could use spatial planning and even at a smaller scale design to expose people more to the food system. So perhaps not to bring food production into the city, which I hear the conversation is going a bit towards, but just to think about it, that over the last year and a half with COVID, everybody has been in lockdown, and I think people now more than ever are super disconnected from the food system just by delivery and convenience. And the reality is that the more disconnected you are, that influences the food choices you're making, and people are going more to ultra processed foods, are not cooking at home. So in a way, like the idea of the demo farm inside the city perhaps would be something to consider, that as spatial planners, how do we give more exposure to those things?
Arnold.
Yes, what crossed my mind, and this I would like to address my question first to Mohsen, because I know that he is, besides the fact that he is an academic, he's also a practitioner. He has his own enterprise. What the question that goes through my mind, will we forever be confronted with a kind of divide between high-tech urban agriculture and the other wing of urban agriculture that I practice on a daily basis, where I meet a lot of people who can not only be treated as consumers. I mean, there is something more to food than just a price in the supermarket. And yes, I know that this in the current economic regime, the price is a very dominant aspect, but it's not all there is. And I feel that there is a growing group of people in our society, particularly represented here in Amsterdam, who have a more, well, maybe a romantic idea of food, and who are consumers, but also want to get informed about or involved in the production, in order to build trust in the food system again. We all know that the consumers' trust was damaged by all kind of food scandals, etc. I was intrigued, by the way, by Art's announcement of the establishment of these, what did you call it, Art? Food, your information, I forgot the exact word that Art used, but these are the production centers within the built-up area of the cities, where you show the production systems to people. But anyway, my question, and I would like Mohsen to answer first, is there any chance of a kind of crossover between these wings of the food movement, between the consumption movement, the consumers who also want to get involved some way or another in production? Herenboeren is an important wing. The community support agriculture is an element of that movement on the one side, and on the other side, the appliance of high-end technology. Is there any place where these two worlds will meet? Could it be in the institutions where you put your technology, Mohsen, or could it be in arts information centers in the city centers with the glass houses on top? What will happen? Maybe first Mohsen and then Art.
Well, yeah. What I didn't mention is that I'm a founder of a company where we produce. But Arnold said we develop indoor gardens, and I think indoor gardens are the place where you produce food, but food that is more than calorie. You don't produce it to consume only something cheap that you can consume every day, but that's more than that. You produce food in a nursing home where elderly people are living, or you produce food in a hotel where residents, or they have every day some guests, and they establish some sort of connection with the food that they're consuming. When they go to the restaurant, they see where this food is coming. And or for these people living in nursery homes, elderly people living there, they see these gardens as some sort of memory of their past, and that the garden can create some sort of healing environment for them. So that in these kind of practices, in this kind of high-tech urban agriculture practices, there is more than they are more than a food production unit. They are about creating some sort of connection between consumers and food production, not really food producers, because these systems are there, produce food, and then they come and harvest, and they maybe consume in the mint tea, or I don't know. It's more, and I see from personally, I think this is where these two meet each other. This technology is being adopted and used in a very small scale for producing food, but not only as something to gain more calories, but to have other functions, to create some sort of healing environment, or give another understanding of the meal that the guests are consuming in the restaurant, and so on. And I see this, the place where these two meet each other. That's what I think. I mean, that's also maybe because of the thing that I do. And I think mixing these two, also what Art said, is really difficult, because these large scale vertical farms are made and developed based on a very different business model. They are there, in this case, growing to produce food in a sustainable way, but also with good price, something that is reasonable for the consumer to buy. But the other one is quite different. It's not really focused. The business model is not focused on the very cheap food production, but has other value proposition for its consumers. And that is, yeah, for example, an healing environment. But I don't know how Art think about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm trying to get a discussion, so that's why I've been a bit extreme in what food can be produced. Of course, I mean, the last 10 years I've been an organic farmer, so I have to get an organic farm with 10 acres, so I'm really a farmer by heart. But I also seen in that 10 years that, I mean, we all would like to make impact on a food system. And what I see is, if you look at organic in Holland, we still talk about 3 to 4% of the consumer-based products. So the impact of organic is so slow and so small. And also what you see in and around Amsterdam, there are a lot of romantic people that love to go outside and that love the farmers. But at the end, it's 1 to 2% of what Amsterdam people are building. So we don't make impact on a food system. It's nice and it's interesting, and we should definitely keep doing it and stimulate it and promote it as much as possible. But it's not changing a food system. It's not helping the people. If I talk about the short chain supply, and you go to Amsterdam to the Bijlmer, and you go in which is a bit of a well, let's say lower class environment. If you start talking there about people, the local farmers in short chain, they are not interesting. They just want to make sure that they have food on the plate the next day. So that's also why I think that there should be different solutions. High-tech farming, or the new way of protein production, etc., will play a big role in the world, but I don't think it will harm agriculture. I think it will help agriculture, because agriculture is being pushed in a production system which is not good for the earth. I think we all agree that the way we farm today in Holland is not the way we can keep farming the next 50 years. To change that, this high-tech farm will only give a huge help, because the farmer will be allowed to go into carbon capturing. The farmer will be allowed to make this small romantic farm, and people will love to go there, because when they need normal food, they get it from a high-tech production system, but they do go to this farmer for this romantic view and this romantic day. So there is a big potential for the small-scale farmers also because of this high-tech food system impact. So I think it will change and it will overlap. It will not be, it's difficult to combine it. I mean, you cannot see it in one go, but it is part of the food system in total. This high-tech farming will not be the only solution. And I mean, we will not lose all the farmers in Holland, definitely not. But I think we need farmers to focus, for example, on biodiversity. But how can you do biodiversity if the pressure on food production is so high? So I think biodiversity, carbon capture agriculture will play a big role in the future of farming, and that can be because of this partly high-tech content. So I think it will be a combination of these things, and it's not one solution is the only one solution for the food chain. It will always be a mix. Vertical farming will not feed the world, no way. But we can play a certain role if we define what role we should play and where we should be. I think that's always important, but sometimes you need to have a good discussion. You need to go in a corner first. But it's a complicated landscape, but it's very important to at least to have a discussion around it, and also to have a discussion around the social thing, because it's all, at the end, it's all about the consumer, and it's about informing the consumer, because at the end they are the ones making the choice. They are the ones making the decisions at the moment they fill their shopping bag.
I think I cannot make any better conclusion than like you have just said. And I think to adding a little bit upon that, like I think it's really important to put food in the center of spatial planning issues, because at the end of the day we all have to eat. And talking about resource space, where are the food, where should we buy the food, I think that's also all very important. So I'm just going to conclude the meeting. So thank you for everyone to join. It was a really pleasure to have these spicy but inspiring discussions with full of knowledge, like insights, and also for all the participants from from all over the world, but also from policy making, from academia, from practitioners, from interdisciplinary. Thank you for coming. So don't forget, upcoming next, we will still have 3 meetings of this year's. And like me, Siska, Janus, Arno, we will work together to curate different topics. So upcoming next, we will talk about diverse community. And just don't forget, follow us. And if you have any questions, if you want to know anything, please like send email to us, Amsterdam Network for Food Planning at gmail.com. We will add you in our, anyone who register will add you in our mail list. So you will receive like upcoming events, and you have further questions or demand like, oh, like I want to know art, can I not, like, so we can help you to do these things. And just thank you very much to come, and see you in next meeting. Bye-bye. Okay, guys.
Thank you very much, Intu. You did an excellent job.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It
nice.
was most interesting meeting.
Thank you. So looking forward to the next meeting, and I'll add the registration mail to our database.
Okay, we'll be in contact.
Yes.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay, ciao.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you. Bye.